You have been there before. Someone looks at you like you are nothing, like your presence in the room is an inconvenience, like everything you have built, everything you have worked for, everything you are means absolutely nothing to them. And in that moment, something primal fires up inside you. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks. Your mind races through 100 responses, 100 ways to make them feel what you are feeling right now. That heat in your blood is real. That urge to snap back, to stand up, to make them understand exactly who they are dealing with, that is real too. But here is the question that separates the men who rise from the men who stay exactly where they are. What do you do with that fire? Most people throw it. They open their mouths. They let the emotion pour out. They say something sharp, something loud, something they believe will cut the other person down. And for a brief second, maybe it feels good. Maybe it feels like power. But it is not power. It never was. What they just did was hand the other person a remote control and let them change the channel inside their own mind. They reacted. And reaction is not strength. Reaction is surrender dressed up in aggression. The most powerful people who have ever walked this earth understood something that takes most people a lifetime to learn, and many never learn at all. They understood that the ability to remain unmoved is not passivity. It is the highest form of control that exists. When the world throws something at you designed to knock you off balance, and you simply do not move, you are not being weak. You are being dangerous in a way that most people cannot even recognize. Think about the most formidable person you have ever encountered in your life. Not the loudest one, not the one who is always ready to argue or fight or prove themselves. Think about the one who made you feel, without them saying very much at all, that they were operating on a completely different level. That person almost certainly had this quality. They were still when others were shaking. They were quiet when others were screaming. They looked at chaos the way a sculptor looks at a block of stone, not as a threat, but as material. That is what we are going to build in you today. Not a mask, not a performance, not a technique you put on when it is convenient. A genuine, deep-rooted understanding of why powerful people do not react to disrespect, and how you can become someone who no longer needs to. The first thing you need to understand is what disrespect actually is at its core, because most people have it completely wrong. They think disrespect is about them. They think when someone dismisses them, mocks them, talks over them, ignores them, tries to humiliate them, they think that behavior is a statement about who they are, and that misunderstanding is the root of every weak response ever made. Disrespect is not a verdict, it is a transmission. When someone disrespects you, they are not revealing truth about you. They are revealing truth about themselves. Every act of disrespect carries inside it a message from the person delivering it, and that message is this: I feel threatened, I feel small, I feel uncertain about my own position, and I am using you as a target to manage that discomfort. Think about it. Truly secure people do not go around disrespecting others. They do not need to. When you are genuinely grounded in your own value, when you know what you have built and who you are, you do not feel the urge to diminish other people. You are too busy. You are too focused. You have too much going on in your own world to spend energy making someone else feel small. Disrespect is the weapon of someone who has nothing else. It is the tool of the insecure, the threatened, the envious. It is a sign of poverty, not material poverty, but poverty of spirit, poverty of self-assurance, poverty of genuine power. So the very first shift you need to make is this: stop reading disrespect as a signal about your worth and start reading it as a signal about theirs. The moment someone chooses to disrespect you, they have told you something incredibly valuable about where they are internally. They have shown you the gap between who they present themselves to be and who they actually are. That is information. And powerful people collect information. They do not get wounded by it. Now here is where it gets deeper. Even if you understand this intellectually, even if you nod your head right now and agree that disrespect says more about the other person than it does about you, you still feel it. The sting is still real. The anger still rises. And that is fine. That is human. The goal is not to stop feeling. The goal is to stop letting what you feel determine what you do. There is a space that exists between the moment something happens to you and the moment you respond. Most people do not know that space exists. They live in a world where stimulus and response are fused together, where there is no gap, no pause, no moment of choice. Something happens and they react automatically, like a machine, like a predictable system that anyone with enough information can control. Pull this lever and this person explodes. Push this button and this person crumbles. Say this particular thing and this person loses all composure. Powerful people find that space and they live in it. They stretch it out. They make it wide enough to think clearly in. And inside that space, they ask a question that changes everything. What is the most intelligent move available to me right now? Not the most satisfying move. Not the move that gives them immediate emotional relief. The most intelligent move. The move that serves their actual goals, their actual position, their actual long-term interests. That question requires clarity. And clarity is impossible when you are flooded with emotion. This is why the ability to remain calm under provocation is not just a personality trait, it is a strategic advantage of the highest order. When you can think clearly in a moment that makes everyone else lose their minds, you see options that are invisible to them. You see angles, consequences, opportunities. You see the full board while they are fixated on one square. This is the foundation. And everything else we are going to talk about is built on it. The powerful do not react to disrespect because they have trained themselves to exist in that space between stimulus and response. They have made it a practice, a discipline, a way of moving through the world. And the result is that they become genuinely untouchable in a way that no amount of aggression or volume ever could achieve. You cannot touch someone who does not need your validation to feel whole. You cannot destabilize someone who has already decided, privately, internally, completely, that they know who they are. And that is the real armor. Not a hardened face, not a sharp tongue, not a reputation for violence or retaliation. The real armor is absolute clarity about your own value, so thorough and so deep that nothing anyone says can penetrate it. There is a pattern that plays out in rooms all over the world every single day. Someone says something cutting. Someone undermines someone else in a meeting, at a dinner table, in front of a group of people who are all watching to see what happens next. And the person who is targeted, they have a choice in that moment. A choice most of them do not even realize they are making. They can react or they can respond. And the difference between those two things is the difference between losing and winning without anyone even knowing a contest was happening. Reaction is automatic. It comes from the part of you that is still an animal, still operating on threat detection, still scanning the environment for danger and firing back before the thinking mind has a chance to intervene. Reaction is fast, emotional, and almost always reveals more about your vulnerabilities than any enemy could ever discover on their own. When you react, you hand someone a map of your weaknesses. You show them exactly what matters to you, exactly what can be used against you, exactly where to push next time they want to see you lose control. Response is different. Response is deliberate. It comes from the part of you that has developed judgment, that understands consequences, that can hold two things at once, what you feel and what you should do. Response is slow enough to be intelligent, and intelligence in moments of conflict is worth more than any display of force you could put on. Here is something that most people do not want to hear, but need to. The person who provokes you is often doing it on purpose, not always consciously, but with some awareness that they are testing the boundaries of what you will tolerate. They want information. They want to know whether you are the kind of person who can be controlled through emotion. They want to know if you have a button they can press. And the moment you react, the moment your face changes, your voice rises, your body tightens, you have answered their question. Yes, there is a button. Here is exactly where it is. Use it whenever you want leverage over this person. But when you do not react, when you simply look at them with calm, level eyes and let the moment sit there, you give them nothing. And the absence of what they expected creates something fascinating. It creates uncertainty. It creates the uneasy feeling that maybe they misjudged you. Maybe you know something they do not. Maybe you are not playing the game they thought you were playing. That uncertainty is uncomfortable for them. And discomfort is a form of power you now hold over the situation without having said or done anything at all. This is the psychology that the most formidable people in history have understood and used. It is not cruelty. It is not manipulation in any malicious sense. It is simply the mastery of your own internal state, which naturally produces an external effect on everyone around you. When you are the stillest person in a chaotic room, people notice. When you are the most composed person in a tense situation, people orient toward you. Calm is magnetic. Calm communicates depth. It communicates that you have reserves that others cannot see, that there is more to you than what is on the surface, that whatever is happening right now is not enough to reach you. Think about every leader, every figure of genuine authority you have ever admired. Strip away the titles, the positions, the external markers of success. What you are left with is almost always this quality, an unshakable internal composure that makes other people feel, in their presence, that everything is under control, not because they perform confidence, but because they have developed such a thorough relationship with their own steadiness that it radiates without effort. That is not something you are born with, that is something you build, and you build it the same way you build anything of real substance, through repetition, through discipline, through choosing the harder thing again and again until the harder thing becomes your default. Every time you feel the urge to react and you choose instead to pause, you are building that muscle. Every time someone tries to pull you out of your center and you stay grounded, you are reinforcing something inside you that makes you more powerful the next time, and the time after that, until eventually the reaction that used to come automatically starts to require effort to produce, until eventually your natural state in the face of provocation is not anger, it is assessment. Now let us talk about something that goes even deeper than behavior. Let us talk about identity. Because the real reason most people react to disrespect is not that they lack discipline. It is that on some level they are not entirely sure the disrespect is wrong. They react so violently because the insult touches something uncertain inside them, a doubt they have not fully resolved, a question about their own worth that has not been fully answered. And so when someone speaks to that doubt, even through cruelty, even through something that is clearly untrue, it lands, it pierces, it produces a reaction that has almost nothing to do with the other person and everything to do with unfinished internal business. This is why the deepest work of becoming someone who cannot be touched by disrespect is not behavioral work at all. It is identity work. It is the slow, honest, often uncomfortable process of deciding who you are and then becoming so certain of that decision that nothing external can contradict it. When you know your value, not because someone told you, not because your accomplishments prove it to others, but because you have sat with yourself long enough and honestly enough to understand it, that knowledge becomes a kind of bedrock. And bedrock does not move when something hits the surface. The insult slides off, not because you have taught yourself to ignore it, but because it genuinely does not match anything inside you that agrees with it. There is no foothold, there is no crack for it to get into. It arrives, it finds nothing to attach itself to, and it falls away. That is not a performance of strength, that is actual strength. And the difference between the two is everything. You have probably met people who perform confidence, who are loud, aggressive, always ready to defend themselves, always the first to take offense, always the most demonstrative about how little they care what others think. And if you have been paying attention, you have noticed something interesting about those people. They are exhausting. They are fragile beneath all that noise. They need the performance because the reality underneath it does not feel stable enough to stand on without reinforcement. The performance is a defense mechanism, a wall. And walls exist because the person inside them does not feel safe without them. The truly powerful do not have walls, they have foundations. And a foundation does not need to be defended because it is not threatened by what happens above it. You can knock things down at the surface all day long. The foundation remains. That is what you are building, not a wall. A foundation so solid that disrespect becomes genuinely irrelevant, not something you suppress your reaction to, but something that simply does not register as a meaningful threat. And here is what happens when you get there. When you reach that place of genuine internal stability, the dynamic in every room you enter changes. People sense it immediately, even if they cannot name it. There is something about a person who cannot be rattled that commands a particular kind of attention, not the attention you get from being loud or aggressive or dramatic, quieter attention, more serious attention. The kind of attention that says this person is different, and I am not entirely sure how to approach them. That is the attention worth having. Not admiration, not fear exactly, something more like respect that is not performative, not social lubricant, not something people hand out to keep the peace, genuine respect, the kind that gets produced automatically when someone recognizes they are in the presence of something real. There is something nobody tells you about the moment after you choose not to react. That moment is uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, because everything in you has been conditioned to respond to provocation with action. Your nervous system wants resolution. It wants the tension released. It wants you to say something, do something, make something happen that disperses the pressure building in your chest. And when you choose instead to stay still, to stay quiet, to let the moment hang there without filling it, that discomfort can feel almost unbearable. Most people break at that point. They cannot tolerate the internal pressure long enough to let the silence work. They rush in with words they do not need to say, arguments they do not need to make, justifications that were never required. And in doing so, they undo the power they were building. They release the tension themselves instead of letting it press back on the person who created it. This is one of the most important things you will ever learn about social and psychological power. Whoever breaks the silence first is usually in the weaker position. Whoever feels compelled to explain, to defend, to fill the space, that person is showing that they cannot tolerate the discomfort of ambiguity. And the person who can sit in that ambiguity, who can let the moment breathe without rushing to resolve it, that person controls the interaction in a way that is almost invisible but absolutely real. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. When you respond to disrespect with genuine, unhurried stillness, not a performance of calm, but actual calm, you are applying a force that most people have no framework for handling. They aimed their words at you like a weapon, and instead of the impact they expected, they found nothing. No wall, no explosion, just space. And that space echoes back everything they threw at you. It makes them look at themselves. It makes them feel the weight of what they just did without you having to say a single word about it. This is why the most sophisticated people in any room are almost never the most vocal. They speak when they have something worth saying, and they remain quiet when silence serves them better. They understand that words are currency, and spent carelessly, they lose their value. A person who says everything that comes to mind is cheap to read and easy to predict. A person who is selective, who holds back, who chooses the precise moment to speak and the precise thing to say, that person carries an air of depth that commands attention even in their quietest moments. Think about what it means to be readable. To be readable is to be controllable. When people can predict exactly how you will respond to any given provocation, they own a piece of your behavior. They can trigger you on command. They can use your predictability against you in any situation where they want to manage your reactions rather than deal with your actual mind. The unpredictable person, the one who does not give you the reaction you expected, the one who responds in ways you cannot easily categorize, that person forces others to stay alert, to pay attention, to be careful. And careful is exactly the way you want people to be around you. There is also something profound that happens to your own internal world when you develop this discipline. When you stop reacting automatically, when you create that space between what happens and what you do about it, you begin to realize something extraordinary. Most things that provoke you are not actually worth your energy. Most insults are not worth a response. Most provocations are small tests thrown out by small minds, and the correct answer to a small test is not a grand performance, it is barely a glance. The discipline of non-reaction teaches you proportion. It teaches you to correctly size the significance of what is happening. instead of treating every provocation as a 5-alarm emergency. And once you develop that sense of proportion, you stop bleeding energy in situations that do not deserve it. You stop arriving at the things that actually matter already drained by the things that do not. Your energy consolidates. It deepens. You become someone who has real reserves because you stopped spending yourself on battles that were beneath you. This is one of the most practical benefits of developing composure that almost nobody talks about. It is not just about how others perceive you, though that matters enormously. It is about the internal economy of your attention and energy. Every reactive episode costs you something. It costs you time, it costs you clarity, it costs you the momentum you had before you got pulled into something that served no purpose. And when you multiply that cost by the number of times per week, per month, per year that most people allow themselves to be provoked, the total is staggering. Whole years of energy lost to reactions that accomplished nothing. The composed person saves all of that. They redirect it. And that redirected energy compounds over time in the same way that money compounds when it is invested rather than spent. The person who has been practicing composure for 5 years has a depth of presence, a gravity, a quality of focus that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has been spending their energy reactively. You have to experience it from the inside to understand what it produces. Now let us talk about something that requires real honesty, because there is a version of this philosophy that gets misused. There are people who convince themselves that never reacting, never responding, never pushing back under any circumstances is the highest form of power. They use the language of composure to justify passivity. They tell themselves they are choosing silence when really they are choosing avoidance, because confrontation terrifies them and stillness feels safer than engagement. That is not what we are talking about. Composure is not the absence of action, it is the presence of choice. The composed person is not someone who never responds to disrespect. They are someone who never responds from a place of unmanaged emotion. They respond when a response serves a genuine purpose. They act when action is the most intelligent available move. The silence they employ is strategic, not fearful. The patience they practice is disciplined, not passive. There is a vast difference between a person who says nothing because they have calculated that silence is the correct move and a person who says nothing because they are too afraid to speak. The first person's silence is powerful. The second person's silence is invisible. And the room can feel the difference even if it cannot articulate exactly what it is sensing. You need to be honest with yourself about which kind of silence you are practicing. If you are staying quiet because you genuinely believe it is the right strategic choice, that is composure. If you are staying quiet because you do not know how to handle the situation and you are hoping it resolves itself without your involvement, that is avoidance. And avoidance does not build the kind of presence we are talking about. It actually erodes it over time, because you begin to associate your own silence with fear rather than with strength, and that internal association poisons the well. Real composure requires the courage to engage when engagement is necessary. It requires the willingness to say the hard thing, to deliver the response that needs to be delivered, to make the move that must be made, all of it done from a place of complete clarity rather than emotional flooding. The person who can do that, who can engage directly and honestly without losing their center, without letting the interaction pull them out of their own gravity, that person is genuinely formidable. They are not easy to manipulate because they are neither predictably reactive nor predictably passive. They make their decisions based on what is actually happening and what actually serves their goals rather than on what their nervous system is demanding in the moment. And that makes them extraordinarily difficult to manage from the outside, which is exactly the position of power you want to occupy. There is one more dimension to this that deserves real attention, and that is the relationship between how you respond to disrespect and how you see yourself in the long arc of your life. Because the way you handle these moments is not just tactical, it is formative. Every time you react from pure emotion, you reinforce a version of yourself that is at the mercy of external events. Every time you hold your ground internally, you reinforce a version of yourself that is the author of your own responses. And those two versions of you lead to entirely different lives. The reactive person accumulates damage over time, not just in terms of relationships and reputation, though those are real costs. They accumulate internal damage, a kind of brittleness that makes each new provocation feel more threatening than the last, because their identity has become increasingly dependent on defending itself from attack. They need to win each confrontation, because losing feels like an existential threat, and that need makes them forever vulnerable to anyone willing to threaten them. The composed person builds something entirely different. They build a self that does not require external validation to remain intact. They build a relationship with their own steadiness that deepens with every challenge they absorb without breaking. And over time, that steadiness becomes the ground of their entire life, the thing from which they operate, from which they build, from which they face whatever the world decides to throw